You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
Today on the show, we are going to be talking about sustainability and the correlation between sustainability and retire early. To help us with this, we have Angela Rosman from treadlightly.retireearly.com. And honestly, the story is way more than that. And we're going to tie into all these different elements, how she discovered financial independence, how she's building a life that she can get excited about now as opposed to waiting until she hits her number, building community, sustainability. It's just going to be a wonderful episode. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing quite well. And yeah, this should be a great episode. Angela has been an active member of our Facebook group going back almost 2 years. And I've seen her posts, and we just said we have to get her on the show. And actually, it's interesting because our friend over at the Military Dollar sent me a message, and I couldn't describe Angela better or more succinctly than this. She blends fire with sustainability and is a leader in the Recognizing Women in Fire movement. So she is a hero among a lot of them. And that just really made me excited to get her on the show and introduce her to the wider FI community. So with that, Angela, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And I'm going to have to tell her thank you for that intro because it's better than I would have written it myself.
Yeah, really good. All right, Angela, I wanted to start with actually going back to the sustainability aspect of your story, because I suspect that this is something that you found long before you were even considering the topic of financial independence and early retirement.
That's definitely true. I might have talked about money a little bit with my dad earlier than sustainability, but it's going to be a hard line because sustainability for me really started full force in sixth grade with my sixth grade teacher who spent quite a bit of time talking to us about climate change and the environment and all that sort of stuff. And that was really my big intro to the environmental side of things. So really, it's kind of been a formative piece of my entire life. And then before that, even I spent a lot of time outdoors, a lot of time catching snakes and frogs and snails and otherwise just hanging out outside. So the natural world has been part of my story from the time I can remember. And then the specific sustainability part comes not much later than that.
So Angela, that's really, really interesting about the sixth grade teacher. How do you get a message across? We talk about that with the FI message. How do you get people to hear about something and actually take action on it or say, wow, that's something really interesting? Do you have any recollection? I know it's a long time ago, but because it was such a formative moment, do you have any recollection of how your sixth grade teacher presented that to you?
I don't know if there was one formative moment. I think it was part of the curriculum the entire year. I've been someone who's always really loved school to the point where in second grade, we had a snow day. I actually cried because we had to stay home. So
I was not that kid.
So that was me. I was that kid. I was very much into school and really liked my teachers and really interacted with what they had to say. But the environmental bit was pretty much through the entire course of that year with him. I don't know if it was one particular piece, but there were some documentaries, there were interactive stuff that we did in class. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but I do know from that point on, sustainability was kind of center to my life.
How does this inform your college choice and career path?
If we go back to my senior year in high school, we actually did senior projects before most high schools did. I don't know if a lot of them do now, but we kind of had the high school version of a thesis. And I did mine on designing a green home with things like dual flush toilets and green roofs and that kind of thing. So that was my choice as a high school senior. But I also had a lot of interest in history and Spanish. So when I started school, I kind of started dabbling in all of those things. But when I really looked at it, I realized that neither of those were career paths I wanted, whereas environmental science was a broad but useful degree. I was about a year into school. I remember sitting on a bench outside of the music building at school, having a conversation with my dad, realizing that I could graduate a year early if I just stayed focused. That meant that I had to pick one degree, not three. And so I picked environmental science and graduated 2 years later, 3 years into school, and with an environmental science degree. And then Spanish and Latin American history were both shy of a major, but I figured staying another semester and paying for another semester wasn't worth triple majoring.
That's a really interesting point. And it reminds me, in episode 114 of our podcast, we were interviewing Brian talking about the admissions process and what parents can do to save. And he said, honestly, the biggest favor that you can do for yourself, in terms of saving money, is just to graduate in 4 years, as opposed to being the super senior or kind of that, hey, don't leave the party early. That just cost you so much money, both from the outset and also from the value of time. But in your case, you were actually able to compress that into 3 years. And I'm curious, if you were to think about your college journey in general, was that the only thing that you did? And what advice would you maybe give to an individual to compress that college timeline and do it at less cost?
So a lot of that had to be done in high school because I was also a varsity softball player in college and in a sorority, and I worked at the Writing Center, and I had a internship at the state of Oregon. So I really didn't have a whole bunch of extra time, but starting with high school, I took a lot of AP tests. My high school had a lot of them available, and starting in my sophomore year, I started taking AP classes, but I took 5 classes at my high school that were APs and took all of those tests. And then my senior year, I took AP Calculus 1 my junior year. It was pretty difficult for me. I actually ended up with, I think, a C in the class, but a 4 on the test. If you can imagine, that's how awesome my teacher was. Basically, if you passed your class, you were going to pass the AP test with a score that was worth taking. But I knew I didn't want to take the second AP Calculus my senior year, which was the only class offered at my school. So I actually took AP Statistics at a neighboring high school. So passed that test as well. And then I was just kind of looking at the opportunity course list of what the other tests were and decided to take comparative government. I didn't actually take the class at all, but just by looking at the description of the test, I figured it was one I could take. So I did a little bit of studying on my own and ended up with a 5 on the test without actually taking a high school class on it.
Wow, that's unbelievable. I've never even heard of anybody doing that. So yeah, you're someone who's excelling. You described that list of things you did in college: softball, sorority, internship, all this other stuff. And yet this started so early with these AP classes. Was this just the person who has an internal drive? How much of this was strategy versus internal drive?
I think it was pretty 50-50. My father was pretty involved early on, but I was the freshman in high school with the big, 501 colleges or whatever with my list of ones I wanted to go to. Unfortunately, one of those schools was Haverford in Pennsylvania, and they came and did an intro at my school. They sat down and said, "We do not give merit aid non-need based." And I was like, all right, cross you off my list, because I knew I wasn't going to get any need-based aid. And I also knew I was absolutely not going to pay for college full price.
So let's talk about that. The college experience, how did you end up doing from, I guess, just an economic perspective? Did you graduate with student loan debt? Were you able to get a portion of it covered?
So I went to a liberal arts college, so still pretty pricey. Graduated in 3 years. I still ended up with $24,000 of student loan debt, which felt like a huge, huge amount at the time, but it was still manageable. I did get a decent merit-based aid, but this is, again, where my father had a big impact on this. They had given me an option for, it was their presidential scholarship or something. And he said, no, you know what? I think they can do better than that. So it was initially a $9,000 a year scholarship. So back in 2006. So I don't know what that would be in today's dollars, but it was a $9,000 a year scholarship. But he said, you know what? We can do a lot more than that, because that's not even a half ride. So we put together a letter and a packet outlining what I did in high school, recommendations from volunteer work and all of that. And we had a meeting with them and pushed with more money, and they increased it from $9,000 to $12,000.
You can negotiate your scholarship package?
Apparently.
How did your dad know this? Where does this come from?
Honestly, he's been an entrepreneur since he was 19. And I think it was just kind of in his worldview that if somebody gives you an offer that doesn't seem good enough, you push back and get something better.
Wow, that is really, really cool. So, Angela, obviously we weren't sure we are going to spend this much time on college, but this is so fascinating. Like, are there any actionable takeaways otherwise? We talked about the APs. I mean, you took a AP test without having taken the course. You went to a different school. Your dad negotiated for a scholarship. Is there anything else for the audience that they could take away from your journey, or things that you might do differently even?
Okay. Well, I also had to take an intro chemistry course at my college for my degree. I hadn't taken the AP chemistry test, so I had to take it in college. But it was one of the really, really, really hard courses at my school. And I saw that, and I saw how much my friends were struggling to get through that class. So my summer between my first and second year of school, I took it at a local community college and was able to take it, get an A on that class, and then transfer it back to my college. So I got an extra class out of the way that wasn't purposeful to getting done in 3 years, but I got it done out of the way. And then I didn't have to worry about a really, really hard class at my school that was not entirely all that interesting to me.
This is incredible. Like, you and your dad, this power team, look at the problem differently constantly. I mean, you say, wow, I really want to take this AP class, but in this case, all my friends are struggling. Let me just dodge that roadblock and just go over here to this community college. That's not a normal thought process. People don't just do that. I mean, you can do that. Clearly, it's an option, but it doesn't come up on 99.999% of the radars of parents and kids that are working together to tackle this college plan. The fact that you could negotiate your scholarship, hey, we want to give you $9,000 in aid. Well, I appreciate that, but I think you can do a little better. Like, I can't even fathom what that letter actually looked like, what that call looked like to that school administrator's office. I think you guys can do more than this. Have you really looked at my daughter's accomplishments? I would love to be a fly on the wall to see either that letter go to the office or that call happen, just to replicate that, because I'm sure the other individuals have been able to do something similar, but I have never heard about it before. You graduate college, you have this degree, you're interested in working in environmental science. What options are available? What do you end up doing?
So that's where the story gets a little bit sideways. I graduated in May of 2009, which, as you can probably recall, is not exactly prime job hunting time. But I knew that when I graduated, I was going to be moving cross country to move in with my now husband, who was in the Marines in South Carolina. So I started looking in February of my senior year and landed an internship about half an hour away from his military base as a naturalist on one of the South Carolina barrier islands. So I graduated, didn't bother staying around for walking and graduation because I didn't care about that. Hopped in my car, drove cross country, and started that job the following Monday. Unfortunately, it was really, really cool. I got to lead canoe and kayak tours and teach people about alligators and snakes and, relocate rattlesnakes and that sort of thing. But it also paid $750 a month for 50 hours a week of work. Obviously, that wasn't enough to live on long term. So I figured that out pretty quickly and actually got a second job working at PetSmart, which for 2.5 days a week actually paid more than the internship that used my degree. But I was
still
determined
working
not.
With animals.
Yeah, I was still working with animals, and we still have a cat that was a result of working at that job. I found very quickly that I can't work at pet stores because they come home with me.
So, Angela, I've got a quick question, if you don't mind. So you said in passing that I think you had $24,000 in student loan debt. You have this job that's paying very little, and obviously you supplemented it with this second job at PetSmart. But talk me through the repayment of that loan and what your financial life looks like at this point.
So to start with, you have a little bit of a grace period when you graduate. So I knew that was looming very quickly. But when my husband and I were looking at places to live, we found ourselves a 2-bedroom that was way more reasonable than some of the other ones. It was a large, older apartment, but absolutely fine. But we decided to spend the $50 a month extra to get a 2-bedroom instead of a 1-bedroom, and then moved in one of the guys that he was in the Marines with. So we had a roommate from pretty much day one. I think he moved in maybe a month after I did. So that helped cut our housing costs way back when. I knew I didn't want to defer my loans. It really actually didn't come up in my brain that that was even an option. So I saw my monthly payment and said, okay, I have to somehow make this work. Neither of us had credit cards or any other debt. My husband's never had any kind of debt in his life. And I just had my student loans. So my focus was on keeping our life costs as little as possible. And then I would use all of my extra money to pay off my student loans, which at that point was just paying the minimums, but it set me up for at the point I had more income to really accelerate and pay them off quickly.
So help us catch up in time. At this point, you have 10 cats, courtesy of PetSmart. You've got loans that you're making minimum payments on, and you're making ends meet, but you're kind of about to hit the wall with this grace period. What do you do to move your financial picture forward?
So we actually maxed out at 8 animals and only 2 of them were cats.
Okay.
But
I was only being slightly sarcastic. I hear I overshot a little bit.
Yeah, that is admirable restraint, Angela. Very impressive.
My husband was getting out of the military the following summer. And so our plan was to pick up and move back home because he's actually from the same area I am. We actually met when we were 14. He got out of the military and we drove home. But before we drove home, in true fashion, I got myself another job back home before we actually made the trip back. And I was working as a park ranger. So that was just a full-time summer job, but it paid like $14.50 an hour. And I felt like I was rich. It was really fun. It was pretty similar to my naturalist job, but talking about, Pacific Northwest plants instead of Southeast plants. And then I landed my current job that I work now in August. And so the 2 jobs actually overlapped for a few weeks. And so I was working them both for the last month full time. I would work my now current job, 8 to 4, and then I would get in the car and start my parks job from like 4:30 to midnight, which was really rough, but it was really nice to get a full paycheck every week. And that extra income went to paying my student loans. And then as the summer ended, that job ended up not ending. I became an on-call park ranger, which I would do for 6.5 years, which did help pay off my student loans. And it was just something that was fun and I wanted to keep doing.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about your current job. And to set the frame here, when you're going to college, many times people are almost forced to think about college as ROI. Increasingly at this point, because the debt burden that comes along with college is so great, many people go into college thinking this has to pay back my student loans. And when you think about jobs that pay back your student loans, liberal arts isn't at the top of that list currently, at least in my mind. And I'm curious for you, as you look back at that, essentially at that ROI and merging that with something that you're truly passionate about, what option did you land on? And what maybe like advice would you give to someone that really wants to pursue something in environmental science and also wants to know what career options are out there that will allow them to pay their student loans back?
I absolutely would get a degree in environmental science again. My current job, I work for a company that builds and owns sustainable, affordable housing in the Seattle area, which is something I'm pretty darn passionate about. So that's absolutely something I would want to be doing. And my naturalist park ranger stuff was really fun. But those jobs tend to be a lot less stable and not pay very well. My boss's husband was a national park ranger, and I saw how much struggle he had. He had to bounce around a lot and didn't have any kind of job security. So as fun as those jobs can be, they're really hard to make a commitment to actually have any semblance of normal life. Whereas where I'm working, it's not the highest paid job, but it pays a reasonable income and I get to do something I'm really passionate about. It did take me 3.5 years to pay off my student loans. So not slow, but not the fastest thing ever either, because I didn't have the biggest income, but I was also really focused to pay it off. So I think trying to minimize your loans, regardless of what you're going into, is really, really important. But also, I'm definitely in the camp of finding something that you really enjoy doing more than something that pays a lot of money.
Angela, you're describing these jobs that people love, but there's this lack of job stability. Do you find that financial intelligence or knowledge becomes more important for them? Are they cognizant of how close they are? I guess really essentially to the edge if they were just living paycheck to paycheck in a job that might go away. Do people think about that? Did you ever have conversations that you can recollect?
Well, a lot of the people I worked with had second jobs, and a lot of them have since gone on to work in different fields. So only a few of them have actually stayed in that kind of path. And a lot of them, if they have gone on for doctorates, because if you want to have any kind of job security and stability, then you end up going that path.
So I'm curious, in this conversation, we've talked about this intentionality that you and your father had going into college. We've talked about how your passions really led the type of job that you were looking for. I think that's a wonderful message, and how you were able to pay down your student loans. But what we really haven't talked about up to this point is something that has obviously become a passion of yours over the last several years, at least, and that is financial independence and this entire concept of essentially financial literacy. When did this become a guiding light for you?
This is where, as much as I didn't enjoy paying off my student loans, if I had the opportunity again, I think I am glad that my parents made me have some skin in the game, because it was the paying off my student loans that informed financial independence for me. Just like a lot of us do, we Google basically, how do I get out of debt? How do I do this faster? And I found punchdebt-in-the-face.com. He's not writing anymore. He sold his site a few years ago, but he was the very first personal finance blog I found. And I found One Frugal Girl soon after. She's recently started writing again, which is pretty fun to interact with her now as another blogger instead of a silent reader. Through them, I eventually found Mr. Money Mustache, and then kind of, it opened up from there and found this whole idea of financial independence. At that point, I was still paying off my student loans. So that was really, really my focus. And the financial independence thing was cool, but really not a focus of mine. And then I paid off my student loans, and I knew that we would be trying to have a baby in the next year or two. So my focus went from having the student loans paid off to saving up some more money to be able to pay for the medical costs of having a child, and then paying for part of maternity leave. That really became my focus, and then had my son and really drifted a lot. I was really overwhelmed, and the finances were not my first focus by any stretch. I would dabble in reading blogs. I've been an avid blog reader since 2011, maybe 2010, but didn't really apply it to my life directly. In 2017, my son was still pretty young, but I was definitely drifting, and we were just kind of spending money as we would, basically to survive life. We've always been pretty frugal, and we've never had any kind of credit card debt or anything like that. But every month was pretty stressful, and it was definitely a balancing act of making sure our credit cards were paid off in full every month, and transferring money back and forth. And it just didn't feel very good. And so just kind of on a whim one day, Retire by 40 had written a start your blog post. And for whatever reason, that one clicked. And I said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to start my own blog. Starting that was really the turning point for me as far as really getting my money under control in the way it is now.
So I want to preface this, that what you're not saying is that the blog made you reach, financial independence, but rather that actually moving from just consuming content to then writing it, committing your thoughts and ideas about money to paper is what allowed you to focus your efforts and start moving towards financial independence.
Yes. Like I said, we've always done pretty decently well. I went back and looked, and in 2016, 2017, we had about a 23% savings rate, which is still pretty darn good, but not financial independence level good. Whereas I just did my...
I think it's pretty amazing. It's interesting, though, that you were talking on the one end about feeling that financial stress of just being able to afford to pay off the credit cards month to month, but also simultaneously being able to hit a 23% savings rate. Have you ever contemplated why you were experiencing that while simultaneously saving far more than the average American?
Well, within that is our mortgage principal. I do include in that percentage payoff. So that's a small part of it. And then we do have a small real estate investment that we had to pay back. And so we were paying that off, but that really was savings. So it didn't feel like it was our money, I guess, is what it was, is that, I shoveled savings money off to the side and then was basically forcing scarcity on myself, I guess, with the remainder.
So Angela, that means, I guess you were paying yourself first, right? Not to use the old cliche, but were you putting money in other pre-tax retirement buckets, or what made up that 23% savings rate other than the items you just mentioned?
Cash savings and an IRA, but we've never had access to 401k since my husband got out of the military. So lots of different small buckets, which is, I think, why it felt smaller to me. There was no like big hefty 401k balance that we were putting it all in. So it added up to a decent amount of money, but it wasn't huge. And again, our incomes aren't huge. So that number percentagely was larger than someone who makes a really big income.
Right. No, I understand. And you used the word drifted a few times. And I really want to hone in on that. What does that feel like for you, someone who was locked in and optimized from the time you were in 10th grade? What does that feeling of drift actually feel like, that losing control? And then how did you find the control when you started to blog? I mean, people are going to listen and say like, oh, she just started blogging. Like, what would that really matter? Talk us through the psychology of that, because I think that's where the heart of this is.
So it really starts with having my son. Being a mom was really, really hard for me from the get-go. I think a lot of that has to do with how much I've always been in control and had a specific path and a direction I've planned to go. And as you both know, being a parent is having to relinquish some of that control, and how overwhelming it was to be a parent. And I ramped up from maternity leave slowly, but by the time he was 5 months old, I was working full time. But part of that was at home during nap time and bedtime. And my whole life just felt really overwhelming and stressful. And basically, like, we were trying to get to the end of the day, to get to the weekend so that we could rush around and do all of our regular stuff to get ready for Monday again. And where that really changed was when my son was a year old. I cut my hours to 80% time, and he started going to preschool part-time. And so all of a sudden, I was going from basically waking up in the morning and either working or childcare or house stuff, basically from the time I got up to the time I went to bed, to going to 80% time. Suddenly, I had a couple hours every day that weren't there before. And slowly, I started to feel like I had more control over my life and more space to think about things other than, well, we need X, so I'm just going to buy it on Amazon because then it can be done and I don't have to think about it, to, well, maybe instead let's go to the library and pick up some books. Or, I can't think about making myself lunch for work, so I'm going to walk and go grab myself lunch, to, I really need to stop buying lunches out. I'm going to bring my own lunch. So it was really kind of a slow burn. And then I really need to stop buying clothes. Not that I was ever a huge clothes buyer, but I had plenty. So I said, okay, I'm not going to buy clothes for a year. And so by the time I started my blog, I had already gone through and ratcheted down my meal spending, and I had put a complete hard stop on clothes buying.
At the beginning of this conversation, you were saying we had a 23% savings rate, and simultaneously we were stressed. You started being intentional and committing your thoughts to paper, coming up with a plan. But then the first choice you make, a couple of the first choices you make, are actually to cut your hours to 80%, so make less, right? And then you put your child into preschool for a couple hours, which is going to cost more. Both of those at face value look like that would actually hurt your savings rate. And then you go through some of these other things that you've done, and they're incredible. What is your savings rate now?
So I just calculated it for 2018, and my goal was 50%. So we came up a little short at 46%.
So you were able to make these lifestyle changes, and we'll go back and work through all of those individually, have a happier life with more time and more balance, and simultaneously essentially, I'm sure other things happen, but just with these two choices, make less, spend more on these things that you value, and still get your savings rate, double your savings rate effectively.
Yeah. I think it was just a lot of the money spent because I didn't have the time to think about it vastly outweighed the money I was making. Granted, I think that would probably be different now if I were to go back to full time now. But now that I've gotten a taste of this 80% time, I have no intention of going back.
That is awesome. And can we talk about how counterintuitive this is? This isn't just obvious. Can we go back to some of these actionable takeaways and help our audience figure out how you make less, spend more, and double your savings rate? What do you do again? Let's talk about this.
Okay, well, I think where it starts is that, you always talk about the big three expenses: housing, car, food. And two of the three we've always done very, very well on. We bought a small starter home in the bottom of the market in this area. So our housing costs have always been pretty reasonable. And then we've always had roommates. House hacking is not a term I'd initially heard. It was just kind of when you buy your house at 23, everybody else needs somewhere to live, so they may as well live with you. So our housing expenses have always been low. We still have a roommate now. Our original plan was at the point that we had a kid that we would no longer have any more roommates. But at the point I got pregnant, we talked to him and said, you know what? You're still a pretty good roommate. You want to stick around even through having a newborn? He's like, yeah, that's fine. So actually, when our son was born, our roommate actually cooked meals like 3 or 4 nights a week, which was really big. And then he still pays us rent. And then when we travel, he watches our animals.
And we
don't charge him a lot of rent.
So that is no small feat.
Well, now we're down to 2 dogs, a cat, and a snake. So
balancing it out.
Yeah, but one of our dogs has to have medication twice a day, so it's a little bit more burden for him. But we've saved a ton of money on not having to pay pet sitters over the years, and then obviously saved money on rent. So our housing costs have always been reasonable. We, retrofitted our home so that it's a lot more energy and water efficient, so our utility bills are lower. We've always driven older cars. So the idea of a car payment is something that's really foreign to me. I've actually never had a car payment in my life. Those two things have always given us space. Food, however, was another animal altogether. Food was something that we've always cared about and said we've cared about. So local, sustainable, good food has been something that we've always kind of given ourselves a pass on, which you would think, well, there's only so much damage you can do with food, right? Well, between the three of us, we were probably spending $2,500 a month or more on food. Yeah, food and drink. But when you have a young baby and you're feeling overwhelmed and DoorDash says that they can deliver you dinner multiple nights a week, and you work in a walkable area where you can walk to awesome lunches that are, good and healthy, but, $15 a pop, it's amazing how quickly you can spend an enormous amount of money on food.
Yeah, Angela, I completely hear you. Obviously, $2,500 a month on food and drink is significant, but you wanted to focus on local sustainable food, which is admirable, of course, but there have to be ways that you pivot this, right? Where instead of going out all the time, you're cooking in, I'm assuming, but are there additional tips? Like, I'd love to hear how you made moves on lowering this $2,500 per month and what you ultimately got it down to.
Yeah, so I started with my work lunches because I was literally eating out 5 days a week. What I figured out, though, is it wasn't really about picking up food. It was more about getting a 10-minute walk in the middle of the day to go pick up the food. This was, I believe, December of 2016. I gave myself a $150 budget for my work lunches, which seems absolutely absurd now. That I would be, struggling to meet that. But basically, I just started tracking every day and wouldn't count money I made from home. And that first month, I spent $87 on my work lunches. Later on, I went 6 months without buying lunches out. So it was really a very slow process to weaning myself away from something that just got to be normal. I still eat a lot of like oatmeal and banana for lunch, something that doesn't actually require work, but it's a heck of a lot cheaper than a, $15 sandwich or whatever. And then I go and take a 10-minute walk in the middle of the day. I'm not walking anywhere. I'm just walking in a circle around the block. But I get that outside time and that few steps, and I'm getting what I really wanted out of the trip without actually spending the money.
Yeah, I think so many of us end up making a purchase to relieve essentially what comes down to boredom or not wanting to be left alone with our own thoughts. And if you can channel that and you can move it to something more positive, in your case, exercise, then you can reframe or you can move any triggers in your life, especially when you identify that these triggers are having a negative impact, in your case, on your finances. If you can find a way just to think about it or look at it just slightly differently, you can move that towards something that gets you closer to your goal. And it's incredible that in your case, making these small choices allowed you to double your savings rate while cutting your working hours. And I think that comes back to this larger theme of identifying what it is in your life that you value. And this example of what you did with lunch is perfect to show you how powerful these small things actually are.
Well, and for me, it was the starting point. So I find that I do better to focus on one thing and do it really well, and then kind of kick it off to work in the background while I start tackling the next item, which was then not the restaurant bit. The restaurant bit was definitely important, and relearning to love eating breakfast at home was a really big deal for the weekends, because we loved going out to brunch because, we're millennials. But making tasty meals at home on the weekends was a really big deal. But then also, we specifically bought our house. One of my prerequisites was that we were walking distance to a grocery store. I wanted to be able to not have to drive my car to our daily needs outside of maybe our work. That seems like that would be a very positive financial move, but for us, it was actually a significantly negative one because we found ourselves at the grocery store every day. A lot of people don't like grocery shopping. My husband and I both actually love it. And so we would go to the store for one or two things, and we'd end up buying all these ingredients to make good meals, but we would spend a lot of money at the grocery store.
Spending a lot of time in the cheese department.
Cheese, meat, preserves. I mean, it's amazing how quickly you can spend a lot of money at the grocery store, especially when you're going pretty much daily. When it's a, less than 10-minute walk to the grocery store, it's really easy to just convince yourself you have to pop in for one thing. So a big change for me was not exactly meal planning, but thinking about having a sense of what we were going to cook for the week, and then doing our shopping on one day and then not going back to the store, making do with what we had at our house already. It seems like that shouldn't be such a huge thing, but for someone who really likes grocery shopping and really likes finding good food, just not going into the store was a really big deal for us.
I want to circle back to the fact that while you were able to reel in your food budget, you already had your utilities totally under control. And I'm curious, because I think there's something here for our audience. You are actually working in sustainability. You're working in affordable housing. You're working in efficient housing, essentially. And so it doesn't totally surprise me that you figured out a way to make your utilities at home more efficient. And that's very interesting because it's something that Brad is actually looking at right now. He's getting solar installed in his house, but he hasn't looked at these other aspects. And I'm curious, when you say your home is energy and water efficient, for someone that's not inside the industry, what are some things that they could do to reel in those basic utilities that run in the background that most of us may take for granted? That's just a fixed, it's just a fixed monthly bill.
Okay, to start with, I really wish I could have solar on our house. We live backed up to a park with these big towering evergreen trees, and our roof literally doesn't see sunlight for 6 months.
I'll just chop the trees down. No, I'm just kidding.
So they're in the park, so they probably frown on that, but solar wasn't an option, so we had to look at actually reducing our use. So to start with, we did water first, because water is the easiest thing that I will tell everyone to just go out and do it. And to start with, that's to replace your toilet, and specifically to replace your toilet with the Niagara Stealth toilet, which I don't know how much you want me to talk about toilets.
I do.
But,
I actually really do.
Okay. So your standard new toilet now has about 1.28 to 1.6 gallons per flush. And the Niagara Stealth, so they're, the dual flush toilets where they have like 0.8 and then 1.6 for the larger flush. The Niagara Stealth is a 0.8 across the board. So by replacing with your 1.6 toilet, or if you have an older toilet, even more than that, to the Niagara Stealth, you're cutting your water for your toilet use in half just by replacing your toilet. And that's a one-time cost. And then once you do it, you forever spend less money on water. And then you go to replacing your shower heads and putting aerators in your sink. I went through and compared to the previous owners, we actually cut our water bill in half. Compared to what we were doing, we'd cut it in a third just by changing those things out.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you have any sense for someone listening with their FI mindset hat on of how much this would cost to do all this stuff, and then like what a payback would be on this?
So I actually did this in one of my very earliest blog posts. So it's terrible, but the math is there, and I went through and did the calculations. The title of that post is Save 50% on Your Water Bill Without Changing Your Life. You can actually see my build usage history for our utilities. And the previous owners used an average of 1,200 to 1,600 cubic feet a month. And we lowered that to 600 to 800 cubic feet. There were 2 of them and there were 4 of us. So the savings is even more dramatic per person.
Wow.
But I did the calculation to replace the 2 toilets, the 2 shower heads, and a 6-pack of aerators was $399.69. That didn't include a plumber install since we did them ourselves, but they're really simple. Even if you haven't done it before, it's something that really anyone can do with YouTube. So if you divide that $400 cost by the $47 a month savings, they were paid off in 9 months. So what wouldn't you do that would be paid off in 9 months and then you have savings forever? So we did this back in 2011. So it's been a significant savings for us over that time period.
This is, I can't even believe I'm saying this. Did you really say that we're talking about $400, $400 and you can replace all of those? That doesn't even make sense to me. How is this possible? The return on that investment is going to last for decades. That's insane.
Yeah, that's kind of why whenever I talk to people about how can they reduce their costs for housing, if they own their home, this is where I go. And even if you are in a rental and you pay for water, replace your shower heads. Hold on to the old one. You can always put it back when you leave. But yeah, if all you're doing is paying for the fixtures and not for the plumber to come in, the plumber is the really expensive part. If you do it yourself, it's really not an expensive fix.
Well, what's the other half of this? So this is water efficiency. You can't get solar. What do you do for energy?
Well, we replaced all of our light fixtures with LEDs. Costco now has some really decent prices on them. So does Home Depot. LEDs used to not be very good. They were, really white and awful and not enjoyable. So we actually did a test this past fall and went over to our neighbors and had her oldest son switch out one of their light bulbs when she wasn't there and asked her to guess which one was the LED. And she had absolutely no idea. So they have come a really long way. Not only do they use 1/25th of an incandescent light, they also last considerably longer. So you don't have to worry about changing your light bulb later on. And then we also did have a 98% efficient furnace installed and all gas piping put in and a new hot water tank. That definitely cost more money, but our local utility actually gave us a $4,500 rebate on the furnace because your utilities really want you to be saving money, because anytime that they can get their current customers to spend less, and as they get new customers on board, they don't have to build a new plant. They don't have to build a new treatment center. So your utilities oftentimes have really decent grants back.
I have so many additional follow-up questions here. One, because this is me, as the lights go out, that's when I'm replacing them. Can you convince me that I should just go ahead and replace them all right now, as opposed to waiting for them to burn out?
Well, it depends on, do you have CFLs or incandescent?
Let's just assume incandescent.
Well, then you're using 1/25th of the energy by switching out to LEDs. It's something that we did basically off the bat. They're cheap enough now that, especially if you live in a house, we're very good about not turning on lights and then turning them off if we're not using them. But especially if you're in a household where people tend to leave lights on, it's going to pay you back sooner. I haven't done the actual analysis for this on the energy side.
When you do, let us know, and we will share that with the community as well. One other question, just because you're an insider. You're the person I've been trying to find to ask these types of questions. The hot water heater. I know my house is probably built in the 70s or 80s. Mine's getting a little bit on the older side of things. I've been thinking I should probably replace this thing. And when I do, I want to do it right. Any recommendations?
We actually went through the process of deciding whether we wanted an instant hot water heater or a regular tank. And this is the preparedness side of us that we decided to go with a tank water heater because in an emergency, if there's a big earthquake, which we're, possible for in our area, that is an automatic freshwater tank reserve. And we just don't use a ton of hot water in general. So for us, we decided to go with the tank, which is cheaper, but depending on your situation, if you go tankless, that's not a bad option either. But all told, I think we spent $12,000 on everything. And that was because we didn't even have gas to our house. So we had to have the pipes run and then the furnace run. And we went for a smarter thermostat and basically the whole thing. But then we also got that $4,500 rebate. So the cost was brought significantly down, but we had baseboard heat. Our home was built in the 60s, so really inefficient. And our winter utility bill for power used to be about $350 a month in the winter. And now we're in the $150 to $200 range. So I haven't done the math, but it's a significant drop. And the return is not terribly long. So it's still worth doing.
Yeah, that was my question as you were going through this. Did you have a control month? Like if I was looking at this as an experiment, I would have just had a normal life before doing this just to get a baseline. And I guess you're saying that it was $350 a month. And then after all the improvements you put in, you're down almost $200 a month in the winter. Is that what I'm hearing?
At our very worst. So probably more like $150 usually.
Wow.
In the summer, we're maybe $60 a month or less. And we keep our furnace at 68 degrees. My husband works outside most of the time. So when he comes in at the end of the day, he likes to be warm. So we don't keep our house very cold. If it was even lower, we would save even more. But we also, that's why we went with a 98% efficient furnace, because then we could keep it up higher and percentagely we wouldn't be saving as much to drop it down.
So like Jonathan said, he's been waiting to have someone to bounce questions off of, and I have as well. So one follow-up to that specific thing. My family and I, we like sleeping in the cold. So I actually bring the temperature down to 63 or 62 in the winter.
It's the Barrett family ice castle from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Oh, it's amazing. But it's so nice to sleep in the cold, all tucked under the covers and whatnot. But in the back of my mind, Angela, I've been wondering, is this actually a bad idea energy-wise? Like when I then wake up and kick it up to 68, which is exactly what I do. Is that a poor decision, or is this like
no? That's a very good decision. You want to do that. We actually do drop ours a little bit in both at night and then when we're gone during the day. But we only drop it to 66 because that's where our compromise is at. But yeah, no, it definitely saves to drop it down in the night. The like new Nest thermostats, we don't have one of those, but they kind of do that naturally, and it does save a significant amount of energy on top of that. So for me, it's not always about the money part. I tend to be thinking the sustainability and the energy savings first, and then the money savings comes second.
It's so interesting. And that's the point I wanted to make, that different people come at this for different reasons. Many people come at it because this is where their heart is. This is what they want to do. But what I love about it is when you can get the pairing, when you can get essentially what you are is on the vanguard. We're going to do this regardless of whether or not it saves us money because this is what we want to do. But then when you can tie that to, and oh, by the way, everybody should be doing this now anyways, because you're also going to save money. That is amazing. And that's why I wanted to spend the time talking about this now, because it is becoming increasingly obvious that everybody should look into these features, these ideas, and implement at least some of them, just because the math is so compelling. Why wouldn't you? There's no downside at this point.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Really, if I could do one thing, it would be for everybody to switch out their toilets. Just start with that. Toilets and shower heads. They're the easiest thing. You don't have to do any kind of lifestyle adjustment at all, and you're still going to save significant water and significant money.
Are you giving me the title for this episode? Oh man. Can we just take a couple minutes? And I don't know how far we want to go with this, but I want to talk a little bit because you've also done a little bit of work talking about zero waste. And while I don't think that we can spend the entire rest of the show talking about this, I'd love to know for our audience just a few things that you did on your journey that maybe somebody would get some benefit from or get some additional information, some actionable points out of.
Yeah, so I don't expect I will ever be the zero waster with the one mason jar full of trash at the end of the year. I live in a household and we have animals and there is waste, but there are also a lot of things that you can do that are really simple switches that do make a significant impact. So Number one for me would probably be to get what are called unpaper towels or just, kitchen rags. My friend actually sewed us some really pretty ones in replacement of our paper towels, but they're terry cloth on one side and a pretty fabric on the other. And we just have a big stack of them in our kitchen. We use them to clean up messes. We use them as like napkins when people come over to eat. And then they just go in the wash with everything else. And they're so small that you don't actually do any more laundry. You just add it to whatever load you're doing. And we usually have, 5 or 10 per load that just get added. And it's so small that it doesn't make a difference. But because we really only use paper towels for like cleaning up when the dog throws up or dealing with bacon grease or something like that, Costco size paper towels last us more than a year. So it's not like we're at zero, but we are a lot less than the average household. And it's such an easy switch. And you realize that they clean up better and they work better. A lot of the single-use disposable stuff is really inferior to the reusable stuff, but we've just gotten so used to being a consumer disposable culture that it seems like it's easier. It seems like it's better. But when you actually make the switch, you realize, drinking your coffee when you go to a coffee shop out of a nice reusable mug is so much nicer than the like paper mugs that you get from the coffee shop. Drinking water out of a reusable water bottle just tastes better than a crappy plastic disposable bottle.
And in the sustainability department, Angela, I actually have a big win for you inside the Mendoza household. My wife came to me probably within the last week and said that for, our second child in the future, she wants to do like cloth diapers. Now, if you had mentioned this to me a year ago that she would have said this to me, I would have laughed you out of the house. That would not have even been in the radar. But we have been slowly moving towards having less of an environmental impact in a bad way, right? Trying to limit that. And it just seems like we were kind of kicking ourselves every time we would throw this massive diapers into the trash can. And even aside from that, what we did with our son is we tackled potty training with him. And I didn't know this at the time, like Brad informed me this, at a crazy young age of like 21 months. Even regardless of the fact that we didn't use cloth diapers for him, he is now basically 90+% potty trained. And the amount of diapers that we've had to use for him has been cut in proportion to that. And I just think about everything that we didn't have to put into a landfill. And at some point you get that feedback loop. Like it really feels good, when you're thinking about it, to be able to make a better choice and see the difference. But what's cool about that is this is the small things that I figured out. You have given me a lot of inspiration for other things that Brad and I can look into. Switch out your toilet. Okay, let's go look that up, see what that would cost. And I am so grateful for you coming on the show and sharing all these actionable ideas with us.
Well, and I think if you were to show her how cute cloth diapers are, to be honest, there are a lot of people who cloth diaper who don't really care about the environmental bit, but seriously, cloth diapers are the freaking cutest thing on this earth. So
we're on the same page.
But they're not your mother's or grandmother's cloth diapers. What we used are all in one. So literally all you do is you either snap or Velcro them on the baby, take them off, put them in the wash instead of in the trash. They're really simple, really easy to use. And yeah, the savings as far as both cost and environmental are staggering. It's really easy to Google and just see pictures of the number of diapers and the waste that comes with one child if you cloth diaper versus disposable diaper them. It's just a staggering difference. If you're going to do one thing as far as something that most people can do with their child, cloth diapering is not as scary and not as hard as people make it seem.
Awesome. Next week, we'll talk about straws. But this week on this show, let's go ahead and let's tackle the hot seat.
You don't want to know how many straws we go through. Oh, God.
Straws are not this huge evil. Like, use all the straws you want, but make these big changes. It's kind of like with finances, make the big moves. If you're not perfect in one area, it's okay. But if you make the big changes, you're going to have a significantly smaller impact than the average person.
And Brad, you can still use straws, man. You just got to get the non-disposable ones, just clean those things every once in a while. I'll put a link to those in the show notes for today's episode so you can check that out. Angela, I love that. I think it so perfectly encapsulates somehow you managed to tie straws to the aggregation of marginal gains. And we're so grateful for you coming on the show. On most shows, that would be the end of the episode. But on this show, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
I am. I've been listening to you guys for almost 2 years, and I guess it's my turn to do this now.
Let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the ChooseFI Hot Seat.
All right, Angela, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
So this one, I'm actually going to have to go with That Frugal Pharmacist. And I don't know if you two have noticed what's going on in her family's life right now. Her son is almost exactly a year younger than mine. And on Christmas Eve, they got admitted to the hospital and he has cancer. Basically, I just want to do a shout out to say, they are this fabulous family. She's got a fabulous blog, but it's had a significant detour in their lives in the last couple of months. And it's just really been hard to have that interaction with that family and see what's going through with them. But a lot of what she's done has set them up so that they can at least set their lives up as well as they can while they tackle this big, awful, horrific road bump in their life. Since she is a blogger, she has set up uriah.life as basically their cancer blog. So if anyone has any interest in sending support, be it, a nice note, or they do have a wish list on there for things that makes their lives a little bit easier. But since she's a blogger, she went the blog route to aggregate this stuff so people can know what's going on and how to help.
It's so hard to even know how to respond to that other than to say that, our prayers are with her and her family. And also that we will absolutely include a link to the content that you just described in both the show notes for today's episode, but also in our newsletter that goes out this week. I'm sure our community would love to reach out and connect with them in some way. I don't know exactly how to do this, but question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote or someone else's.
So I think you have to know which article I'm going to select here, and that's Meet the Women of the Financial Independence Movement. I wrote it just over a year ago. The backstory of this post is one of the large bloggers I'd been reading for a long time had put together, his blog reel of his favorite blogs, just like we've seen a lot of people do. And on this list, it was a reasonably long list. He had one woman writer on there. And as I was reading the comments, someone asked, are there any other women that you would suggest to be added to this list? Who else do you read? Can you think of anyone else? And he was able to think of one other woman. This was pretty early when I, was earlier in my blogging journey, but I was like, you know what? I can think of a lot more than 2 women who are writing about personal finance and financial independence. So I decided to write that list. Initially, I expected it to be 30 women, maybe, and I published it, and literally the names started pouring out. Ones that I'd known about and just completely missed, and then ones I'd never heard of. But that list now contains over 100 women and books and podcasts. We actually had to go through and split it up into categories because there was just like an overwhelming number of women. So Erin with Reaching for FI and I, over the next week after the post came out, actually spent a number of hours putting it together and organizing it out to make it easier to find the bloggers that you can relate to better in your journey. So we've got women who are single and pursuing financial independence on their own, women who are widowed with children pursuing financial independence, lesbian couples. We've got your regular dinks. We've got basically all different categories, but all women voices that are writing about this money stuff. There's still a lot of bias that the personal finance space is male dominated. I am trying to do my part to change that narrative because there are a lot of us that really care a lot about money.
What I love about what you're saying is that we have both seen this and also seen this change like a lot over the last, I would say 12 months or so. And I can very clearly remember that stereotype that financial independence is for white male tech bros from Silicon Valley or wherever, right? what I've seen now is almost this democratization of information, and what people care about is story. And they don't always relate to the same story. They don't always relate to my story or Brad's story or your story. Like, we have different paths, and people look for someone that has walked a mile, if not in their exact shoes, and something similar to theirs, so they can figure out what is that first piece of action that I can take. And what I love about it is you're talking about hundreds of different types of stories that people are relating to, that are reaching millions of people all around the world. And I know even, in your Facebook group, with thousands of people in that Facebook group, and our Facebook group, which is not gender specific, but we have over 52% women in that group. And it shows you that this is not for just single dudes living in one particular part of the country that are following one particular career path. This is a life optimization strategy that transforms every single aspect of your life. And I love the fact what you did. I mean, your blog domain was dedicated towards sustainability, right? Tread lightly, retire early, documenting your path to become more intentional. But along the way, you picked up the mantle and you showed how many people are following this path and their unique story. And that's one of the reasons that we were so excited to have you on. And I'm grateful that you highlighted that. Question number 3, your biggest life hack of all time.
So this one's going to be a little different, but getting enough sleep every night. I obviously do a lot in my day. I don't have a lot of downtime. I don't watch TV. I don't sit down a lot. And I'm generally productive from the point I get up until I go to bed at night. Productive can also mean going for a run or being in the garden, but I tend to be moving throughout my entire day. And the thing that makes that possible is that I get 8+ hours of sleep every night.
Angela, what do you do as far as sleep hygiene? Are there items like blackout curtains, no tech, X number of minutes before bed? Like, talk me through what you do.
So we actually co-sleep still with our 4-year-old and have since he was an infant. We pretty much have a family bedtime. My husband and I both have to get up early for work. And so bedtime for us starts 7:30, 8 o'clock. We get pajamas on together, brush teeth, read books, lay and talk. But because we're doing our son's bedtime routine, it becomes our bedtime routine. And, that's 7 days a week, and just having a regular bedtime every day, and then having, it's tech free because it's tech free for him. It's tech free for us.
Yeah, Angela, I love that. And personally, I prioritize sleep significantly. It's a huge thing for me. I am just one of these people who just does not function well when I'm getting even something like 6 hours of sleep, which most people would consider normal. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, 6 hours of sleep and I'm a complete useless person the next day.
Oh, I hear you. All right, question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
So I think the biggest financial mistake, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but was the gap between when I paid off my student loans and when I really started, buckling down, writing this blog and really tracking our finances closely. There was a 3-4 year gap where we really just drifted and kind of spent as we were going to spend. And I know that's not like huge, but I did a lot of stuff right from the beginning. And that was the one piece where I kind of veered right. Unless you want to say that, cutting my hours and giving up thousands of dollars every month financially, probably money wise, that is my biggest financial mistake, or going into a career that didn't have a huge salary. But I can't quite call those mistakes because for lifestyle, they've absolutely been the right choice.
All right. Question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
So this would probably be similar, is to stay on track and pay attention and to track your finances, but also to realize that you need to give yourself space in your life to do things other than work and other than your absolute commitments. Giving myself the space to have a couple hours extra in my life every day to just do things and make it so that our weekends were weekends and not crazy treadmill runs has really made a significant difference in my life. And before I had my son, I was definitely down the workaholic path. And I find that I'm much happier to have a more balanced life now.
All right, Angela, we have a bonus question. What is the purchase you've made in, let's say, the last 12 months or so that's added the most value to your life?
So this is probably more like 12 and a half months ago, but we bought a air mattress for my husband's truck, and we go truck camping. So it's one that actually inflates and goes over the wheel well. So we have basically a queen size air mattress in the back of his truck, and it's also got a canopy top. So instead of, renting a cabin in the winter or whatever, we'll go camping in January, February, March, even in the Northwest. So we have the air mattress and a electric blanket. We've gone camping when it's 30 something degrees outside and been totally warm and happy because we've got a nice setup, but it also didn't cost us a terrible amount of money.
So how does the electric blanket work with the truck? Is that being plugged into the adapter?
No, that's actually used for campsites. A lot of them have plugins, not just the RV sites, but like regular campsites. And then we do have a backup to use if we're off grid, but generally off grid is snowy. So we're generally there when we don't need the electric blanket.
Nice. All right, Angela, this has covered so much information. I'm sure people are going to want to find out more about all the topics that you've covered with regards to sustainability. And many people hearing this are going to want to connect with you about really finding out more about women in personal finance and what is being done out there. What is the best way for someone that's hearing this, that is hearing about you for the first time? What is the best way for someone to connect with you and connect with your content?
So I write over at treadlightlyretireearly.com, and then I'm on Twitter more than I probably should be at treadlightly_RE.
Angela, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been amazing.
Thanks for having me. It was fun to talk with you too.
Brad, this is another piece of the puzzle. I mean, what she is doing, so many people pursue sustainability as a calling, and so many other people are kind of interested in it, but they need to know that it makes sense financially. She was able to put all of this into a framework for us that I think is going to have so much value for people in our community.
Yeah, Jonathan, it was a great story from start to finish. Just really remarkable. And you're absolutely right. Like I've always had in the back of my mind, and I think you were asking about this, like, okay, does it really make a difference to change out a light bulb? Is it really, am I going to see this in my bill? But if she's saying it's 1/25 and you do that with every light bulb in your house, and then you layer on the toilets and the low flow shower and all these other things, you're actually going to see a difference. So I'm on board. I mean, this is fantastic.
Now, you actually do a pretty good job tracking all your historic numbers. So we're going to be following up with you in a year about solar. But if you guys end up doing this on all your appliances, I think I'm going to do the same. We should be able to have some before and after data to start comparing, for, a year from now or 2 years from now on the show. It'd be really interesting to see whether or not that's part of it. You always wonder in the back of your mind, does it work in my state, right? Well, I know it works in Seattle. I know it works in Rhode Island with solar, but does it work here? And that's why I love, when you looked into solar and decided to do it in your home, now we have this information and we have really, data that we can extrapolate out. And so, we'll have to just see where this goes, and we'll obviously talk about it in the future. But a huge thanks to Angela for coming on the show, talking about these different ideas, really sparking this conversation. This was wonderful. To our audience, if you got value from today's episode, if you've been getting value from the episodes up to this point, just take 1 second, press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. Just lets a provider know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at ChooseFI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. To do that, just go to ChooseFI.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to ChooseFI.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to ChooseFI.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 100. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.